Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the All Era Sports with Sirhan, streaming live on the X platform. As I come to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America on this 14th of January 2026. Here's someone everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Cooler weather just hit this tri-state here all of a sudden after a warm 40 to 50 plus degree days over the past couple. But of course, it's Ohio and Cincinnati weather, so can't expect anything else. It is Ohio weather, but the good thing I have going on right now is, of course, this thing behind me, per usual. Always keep me warm in these cold weather, frigid temperatures indoors. Here's someone everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Lots to get to, including relive a season of perfection. And the Raging Bull finally gets a significant win in a significant rivalry, among many others. But of course, it's Wednesday. It's Pick'em Wednesday. And of course, it's this weekend where you talk about the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. It starts Saturday afternoon in Denver, where it is the Buffalo Bills going up against the Denver Broncos. And we're going to find out how good Denver is. I know Buffalo's banged up all over the place, and they had a physical game against Jacksonville, and it was one of the more physical ones you could have by today's NFL standards. But last time I checked, Buffalo still has Josh Allen. That's going to be the difference. The Denver defense is going to play all they can to disrupt him and make things rough for him. But as we saw against Jacksonville, whatever they threw at him, he answered the call. And I expect him to do the same thing here. And I expect him to go to Denver and escape with a win. Because the whole thing's going to come down to, simply put, Bo Nix versus Josh Allen. I think you know who the answer is going to be to that one. I think Buffalo continues their run toward the AFC title game, and I think they handled this one, and I think they do it in a solid fashion. I mean, I'm surprised that they're the favorites, but again, everybody thinks the Broncos are a year behind, not ready yet. But that defense is lights out, but still too many questions on that offense for anyone, yours truly being one of them, to think they can pull us off Saturday against Buffalo. I think it's going to be a doozy. I think it's going to be a less than a touchdown difference. Do give me Buffalo on the road. And the Saturday night tilt goes up to Seattle, and it's the third meeting between the 49ers and the Seahawks. Interesting story when you talk about this one. The road team has won both games this season, and neither game has been particularly close. But when you think about what's about to happen this Saturday, I think San Fran, although they showed a lot of heart against a Philadelphia team who basically checked out as the game was going on and didn't have any answers for what San Francisco was throwing at them. Question is, do they have enough on the defensive side to slow down a Seattle offense who is not great, but is efficient enough to move the ball up and down the field? And can the Seattle offense find a way to score points on that vaunted Seattle defense, who, by the way, knows how to stop offenses, as they've done it quite a few times this season? And I think this one, like the two all NFC West battles this season, is going to come down to who can execute when it matters most. And I know there's a lot of questions regarding Sam Darnold, and understandably so when you think about what happened in last year's playoffs against the Rams when he was in Minnesota. But I think this time at home, I'm going to give him the team the edge, because I think Mike McDonald's going to have his team and that defense ready to go. And I question how much the 49ers on the defensive side has left in the tank to try and slow this down. Remember, the season finale, Seattle just pounded San Fran, and the only reason why the game was more one-sided was because Sam Darnold just made questionable plays all over the place. But do give me Seattle at home. I think this one is going to be a close battle. The old school NFC West. And I think this time, Seattle's going to be the one to make the plays, because I don't know how much of that personnel is going to matter if the 49ers can't find a way to muck it up. And I think the two-headed monster of Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker will be the one to doing the damage. Give me Seattle at home. It's going to be a pretty darn good one. Now to the two games that's going to take place Sunday. The first one is, of course, Houston at New England. And we know how good that Houston defense is, and they're just lights out. But there's still questions about whether or not C.J. Stroud can be the man. We talk about C.J. Stroud moving forward. And you're going against a Patriots defense who put the clamps on the Chargers. And I don't think this Texas offense is much better than them. And it's going to play right into the hands of the New England Patriots. And I think the Patriots offense is going to make just enough plays on offense to where they're going to get the win. And I think they're going to leave more questions about the Texans moving forward, especially the status of C.J. Stroud as an elite quarterback. Because remember, a few years ago, he put himself in the top 5, and we're going to have to find out just how good he really is. And remember, he looked awful against Pittsburgh. Just got bailed out by a defense who just put the clamps on a less than mediocre Pittsburgh offense, as we know. But this is a different offense that they're going to face. And I think Drake May is going to make just enough plays against a stingy defense to get the job done. And do give me New England at home. This one, I think, also is going to come down to the wire. I think it's going to be a low-scoring, medium-scoring type game. But I think the Patriots make just enough plays to get the job done. And that one, I think, is going to be a doozy up there at Foxborough. And maybe the game of the night takes place in Chicago with the Rams and the Bears. And Chicago gave up big plays all over the place to Green Bay, but we know what happened in the end. The Chicago offense figured it out. Neither team's defense is going to stand out, so expect a shootout. But it's going to come down to Matthew Stafford versus Caleb Williams. I know it's redundant with quarterback talk, but we're in the playoffs, and it's more under the microscope. But when you have two weapons the caliber of Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, and a running back duo of Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, and you have Matthew Stafford playing at the level he's playing at, and the defense, even though they've given up big plays, can still find ways to get to the quarterback. That's where I'm going to tilt, and I'm going to tilt toward the Rams. It's simply because I think they have just enough firepower to take care of Chicago over at Chicago Stadium or Soldier Field. I think it's going to be has the makings of a shootout because neither team's defense is all that great. But I think the Rams offense does just enough to advance to the NFC title game. And give me the Rams on the road. So my AFC and NFC title games, for my AFC, it'll be round 3 of the Patriots versus the Bills. And my NFC championship game will be round 3 of the Rams and the Seahawks. And we know what just happened in Seattle not too long ago when those two teams played. They just lit it up for the game of the year. And I think those two championship games hold up, we're going to be for the doozy for championship games all over the place. And these 4 games, I think all are going to be less than a touchdown different. I don't think it's going to be a wipeout nowhere across the board because a lot of these teams, I won't say they're evenly matched, but they're closely matched. And I think all 4 of these are going to be very good games, and it's going to be worth watching. Probably one of the better divisional rounds we had in a while. And I think that's what we're going to have here this weekend. Looking forward to this one. And people say there's no real storylines in the NFL. Got a lot of intrigue because some new faces are here. And, of course, we have the familiarity of Josh Allen. And we know what's the story about him trying to get it over the hump with no Mahomes or Jackson in the playoffs. But lots of intrigue, lots of intriguing storylines, lots of new faces. And I think a lot of them are going to take advantage of this opportunity. And you're going to see some new faces shine and set the league up in good hands for the years to come. And I'm looking forward to it. And speaking of teams on a run, it was over 70 years ago today where it was the 1972 Miami Dolphins completed their perfect unbeaten season. And they won the Super Bowl going undefeated. And we talk about how they got to this point, beating Washington by a score of 14-7. When you think about the run they had, I get it. It's a different league than it is now. Less teams, among many other things. Of course, not today, more parity. But we talk about how they won this game. It basically forever known as the no-name defense. Nobody really, there's some formidable guys I'll mention in a second. But it's one of the favorite adages when you talk about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And that's how the 1972 Dolphins finished off the Super Bowl run this season, that season in 1972, when they won 14-7 over Washington, and still remain the only team that went undefeated from start to finish. It was basically the final record was 17-0, just going one game at a time. Now we talk about why they got the name of the no-name defense. There is no real standout, but they were respectable guys. We talk about a key linebacker and a tough player named Nick Bonacani. Of course, some of the old school guys know Nick Bonacani as a guy who co-hosted Inside the NFL on HBO with the great Len Dawson of the Kansas City Chiefs. But a staple of that great defense during that time, it was one of the leaders of that team that went 17-0 in 1972. And you talk about the heart of the defense, a player named Jake Scott, Manny Fernandez, clogging up the middle at the nose tackle position, and one of the premier pass rushers named Bill Stanfield at the defensive end. And of course, you got the offense guys like Larry Zonka, among many others. But we talk about what made this run. One of the interesting things, they were number one across the board, and you expected it. I mean, points allowed, total yards, rushing yards allowed, passing yards allowed, because they did it as a unit. They don't have those superstars, but they did it together as a whole. And when you can put together a team as a whole like that, the way that Dolphins team did throughout that 1972 season, where they strive for perfection, that you're going to expect these kind of results. And you talk about dominance, they're the only team in NFL history to have first across every scoring statistical category: scoring offense, scoring defense, total offense, and total defense. As I said, it's a different league at that time. I understand it. But have we seen anybody come nearly close to it? No, we haven't. And that's what made this thing run. And you're talking about a team that led a force 46 takeaways, 26 interceptions, and 20 fumble recoveries. That's how you play defense, and that's how you go after it. And that's what the 1972 Miami Dolphins did, when they capped it off with a victory over the Washington team 73 years ago. And we talk about the offense, Bob Greasy, the quarterback, and Larry Zonka, one of the more underrated players in NFL history at the running back position. You talk about Larry Zonka. He was one of those pure, one of the first kind of a pure power runner at the fullback position, which is something we don't see much these days, because fullbacks are a dime a dozen. But back then, you had a power fullback like Larry Zonka. You can control the game, and that's what he did during that 1972 Dolphins run. Zonka eventually formed an iconic duo with Mercury Morris, a part of the 70 Dolphins teams. A brutal straight-ahead runner who could beat you up. I mean, these days we don't see as much north and south runners, maybe a couple. But back then, the fullback position was always north and south. And Larry Zonka would want to punch it down your throat. And that's how he was. And we talk about his constant performance throughout that particular season when they won the Super Bowl over Miami. I mean, he didn't get the MVP. We'll just give it to Jake Scott. But that's why Larry Zonka was probably a key piece on that offense that allowed the team to play ball control throughout that particular season. And that's why they led the league in total offense, because they balanced it well. And we have a power runner like Zonka, you're going to get the job done. And that's what they did. That's what they did 72 years ago when they beat Washington to conclude that perfect season. And we talk about how they got to that point. If we look at it, I'm looking at this week by week. I mean, there's nothing more to say. I'll just go up to the postseason when they just beat the Cleveland Browns at the Miami Bowl, 20-14. They went to Pittsburgh at Three Rivers and stunned the Pittsburgh Steelers. We talk about that game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was a back and forth game with the capper being, if I can read this correctly, replacing, if I can pronounce his name correctly, Morrell at quarterback with Bob Greasy. And at that point, and they just took over. And at the end of the game, After Dante Moore blocked another kick, the Dolphins had a 49-yard drive that pushed them ahead and stunned the favorite Pittsburgh Steelers, who was about to be in the middle of that steel curtain run. And then, of course, we talked about going to Los Angeles and beating Washington for the Super Bowl, for the quest of perfection that took place over 70 plus years ago. Oh, excuse me, 52 years ago. I apologize. And this was a defensive battle, but played right into the hands of Miami, because that no-name defense played together as one and stopped the Washington offense. And the farthest Washington got at one point was a Miami 17, and that was it. I mean, they couldn't do anything after that. They got a touchdown late, but other than that, the ball game was basically under control by Miami. And the game wasn't as indicative as the score was, because that defense put the clamps on Washington. And we talk about playing as a whole, the whole being the greater than the sum of its parts. That's what the 72 Dolphins did. And we haven't seen anything quite like that for a while afterwards. And we're never going to see anything like that ever again, because for a boatload of reasons, how it is today versus 1973. And that's why the standard that the 1972 Miami Dolphins was and always will be the gold standard when it comes to starting and finishing on top, wire to wire, because that's what they did. And we talk about some of the awards they won. Don Shula, the coach of the year, that was a no-brainer. I mean, you were perfect. You were the coach of the year. Comeback player of the year was a quarterback, Earl Morrell, but of course he was benched for Bob Greasy during the AFC title game in Pittsburgh. And of course, the Super Bowl MVP was Jake Scott in the secondary, widely regarded as the heart of that secondary of that 1972 Miami defense. And of course, some other players, as I mentioned, Dick Anderson, and of course, Nick Bonacani. Nick Bonacani, of course, one of the vocal ones of that team, and still was till he passed. Every time you would talk about the 1972 Dolphins, one of the guys that always talks about, because you saw him all the time, was Nick Bonacani. Not just he was a pretty darn good player, but he was a very good analyst. We talk about what he did with Len Dawson on Inside the NFL when it was on HBO, and it was the premier football show on the premium networks for the longest time. I would say at least 2.5 decades. And that's what made Nick Bonacani a household name, more for what he did off the field than what he did on it. But what they did 52 years ago, from start to finish, wire to wire, the best team in the NFL, to complete the season of perfection, to beat Washington, to win the Super Bowl that year, something we're not going to see ever again. I mean, look at the 2007 New England Patriots, how hard it was for them to get to 19-0 before they lost the Super Bowl 42 to Eli Manning and the New York Giants. There are a lot of teams that went 13-0, 14-0, and just can't get over it to get to that point. I'm going to point to a boatload of examples. Recent was the 98 Broncos, who started 13-0, lost back-to-back to the Giants and the 49ers. And even the members of the Broncos said, we're glad, it happened, because the pressure was coming on. Of course, the more recent one was the 2009 Indianapolis Colts. They started from start to finish, but they couldn't finish undefeated. We haven't had an undefeated regular season since the 2007 Patriots, and I don't think we're ever going to see it for many reasons because of how the league is, which is a testament to what the 1972 Dolphins did from start to finish, wire to wire, never losing a game. And we talk about the average victory of this one here. I'm looking at the season as we're discussing this. Average victory of here, only 3 to 4 victories I see here are less than a touchdown, because they just obliterated everybody from start to finish because they were number one across the board on offense and defense. That's what made that team special, because they were just so dominant. You have your team comparisons and your player comparisons of eras. That's why I say you can't compare eras, because what they had to go through versus what some of today's guys have to go through, and you can't sugarcoat anything. I mean, everyone says they can't play in today's league. How do you know that? I mean, they were number one across the board. How can you say today's guys can't play in that league? What's the criteria? And that's why what Miami did stands on its own, and it's something we're never going to see ever again. And credit to Don Shula for having that team ready to go from start to finish, winning every single which way possible en route to the Super Bowl when they beat Washington to cap off the perfect season of the 1972 Miami Dolphins. May God rest the soul of the great Don Shula. Strong case for the greatest coach in NFL history. Of course, a lot of names, we talk about it. We have Vince Lombardi, obviously with Green Bay, Tom Landry with Dallas, Bill Walsh of San Francisco. Maybe, of course, some of the modern ones, Bill Belichick at his time in New England. Some people put Andy Reid in that conversation. You throw some others. Marv Levy in Buffalo would be a good one, even though he didn't win a Super Bowl. Hank Stram during his time in Kansas City was a good one. Many, many others. But Don Shula might have a strong of a case as anyone who ever coached the NFL to have the distinction of the greatest coach in NFL history. But consider he toppled the 300 win mark and has an all-time wins record, something that's probably never going to be touched or broken. Tells you the testament of just how brilliant he was as a football mind in the NFL. It took even his time at the Baltimore Colts before he went to Miami. And he was certainly a one-of-a-kind head coach. May God rest the soul of the great Don Shula. So that takes care of the NFL segment. Briefly, I'll touch on college real quick because this was a hot topic during the college playoff. I think this was a no-brainer. Oregon's Dante Moore staying is the only decision he can make. I mean, you know how bad you looked against Indiana? Granted, Indiana's made everybody look bad, but you haven't been that great yourself either. Probably the smartest thing he did was stay in college, build himself up a little more before he goes to the 2027 NFL draft. And a very good quarterback. I mean, he did well. Got Oregon to, a bowl, the college playoff before the title game, losing to Indiana. But we know Indiana's the power right now. But Dante Moore made the right decision, made the smart decision, but it's also the only decision when you consider how he looked in the college football tournament, in the college football playoff, because he wasn't all that great. And he had no other choice. But it's also the smart thing. Rebuild yourself so you put yourself in the 2027 NFL draft where it's going to be a bit more quarterback heavy and you put yourself up there and just build yourself, play with confidence, because he didn't play with confidence when they lost to India, of course, because India just beat him up. Get back, go back to playing football, get yourself ready for the 2027 NFL draft where you're going to be one of the top quarterbacks taken if you hold your own and play pretty darn well. You have the talent to be an NFL quarterback at some point, but you did the right thing because you need more experience going to the NFL, and you made the smart choice, but it was also the only choice given how bad you looked at times this season for Oregon. Everybody rushes this, especially now with how this nil transfer portal, et cetera, with certain decisions in the collegiate quarterback system as it is. But people need to step back and learn how to be smart a little bit. And I think that's what Dante Moore's thinking was. I said that wasn't the smart decision, but how he looked, it was probably the only decision, and it might benefit him better down the line. I'll touch more on that when draft day and next year's college season comes around. Now to the world of boxing. Everybody's talking about it already, and we're only 2 weeks away, but it is, of course, the showdown between Teo Lopez and Shakur Stevenson. Let's start with this. If you're Teo Lopez, it's do or die, because you haven't had a relevant performance since you beat Vasyl Lomachenko, and you're still remembered for what happened to you when you fought George Kambosos, and because of it, you're up against it. I mean, you won a fake junior welterweight championship from a broken down Josh Taylor, and you had fights against guys like Steve Claggett and Jermaine Ortiz where you carried them the distance, and you can probably say a couple of fights in the middle you had got gift wrap decisions, but you have one chance to right that wrong off, but you're going against a guy who's waited for this moment for a while, and Shakur Stevenson. And after what he did to Williams Zepeda, how he got the win in that one, just managed to actually slip and stay in the pocket and mix it up a little bit. I'll give him that. Shakur Stevenson is going to be more ready than ever. And it's up to Teo Lopez to match. And I think this is going to be a much better fight. Some people are calling it a wipeout for Shakur. I'm not sure I will go that far. I'll make my prediction the day before the fight. But you're Teo Lopez. Last time people remember you of significance was your loss to George Kambosos. Grant, you got to win for fake junior welterweight titles against Josh Taylor, a broken down Josh Taylor. And you were calling for a fight against Terrence Crawford all along. And you got stuck with this. If you don't do anything of significance against Shakur Stevenson, and I mean significance, I'm not saying just get a win, significance. If you don't get anything of significance, that George Kambosos loss is going to haunt more than you think. And you better get the job done in 2 weeks if you don't want to remember for the Kambosos loss, because that's what you really remember for. And not the fact you lost that fight, you laid an egg, and the judges gave you a little too much credit because I thought Kambosos won that fight going away. You're becoming what Hector Camacho was after his fight with Edwin Rosario. And if you don't want that label smacked onto you, you better do something of significance against the great Shakur Stevenson, who's knocking on the door on the top 5 pound for pound. And if you're not ready, maybe the people saying Shakur's going to wipe you out might be true. Because you're up against one of the premier talents, pound for pound, right now in the sport, and Shakur Stevenson. And you're closing out a do or die mode. We consider everything that's come out of your mouth over the last 5 years and how you've laid eggs constantly after you lost to George Kambosos, even though you've won fights. You better do something eyebrow raising against Shakur Stevenson, or there's going to be some real questions that are going to have to be answered. And that ghost of George Kambosos will lay down on you and lay down on your heart. Now, for the flip side for Shakur Stevenson, you haven't had a knockout. I don't know how long. I know you had knocked out somebody overseas, but it was a gift wrap knockout because the guy just folded like a lawn chair on his own. You have a golden opportunity because people think you're the next big thing in that pound for pound status. And I think you are too. But you, like Teo Lopez, you better have an eyebrow raiser performance if you think you're in that pound for pound category. And I think you're ready for it. The opportunity is there. It's up to you to take advantage of it. Last time I saw you with any kind of performance of perfection was when you wiped out Oscar Valdez. And if you come remotely close to what you did at Oscar Valdez, yeah, you're in the pound for pound category, but you have to be as good against Teo as you was against Oscar Valdez, where you just paintbrushed him. I mean, it's doable, and no one's going to call Teo Lopez a slouch because he's not. But if you're Shakur Stevenson, you better have a performance like you had against Oscar Valdez, because the moment is here. It's something like this you've waited for and you wanted. Now you have to take advantage of it. And I think that fight coming up in 2 weeks has a lot of interesting storylines, both fighters, both ways, and what can happen from the past, present, and to the future. And for the winner, you're gonna elevate yourself quite high. I don't know who's going to win. I'll make my prediction in 2 weeks. But there's a lot to talk about with this fight, and people already started their hup all over the place. I can't wait for it. And I'm sure a lot of people in the fight community can't also. I mean, they're both good fighters, but it's about now getting to a higher point. And I'll conclude by saying this when I talk about Teo Lopez. And this is a bit of a side topic, but this has to be brought up, because he always mentions Terrence Crawford. And this is one thing everybody in the fight community misses. Everybody. There was a time both Teo Lopez and Terrence Crawford fought under the top-ranked banner with Bob Arum. And they were one division apart. Teo Lopez could have gone to Bob Arum and said, "Give me Terrence Crawford." And Terrence Crawford would have welcomed it. But Teo Lopez didn't want the smoke until Crawford started pursuing Canelo, and because Teo didn't want any part of Crawford when they were under the top-ranked banner, tells you who the one who ducked that particular fight, because he knew Crawford would overwhelm him. I mean, they were in the top-ranked banner, both under the same promotion, and could have had that fight anytime they wanted. More so Teo Lopez, who kept calling Crawford out. And if he would have called Crawford out when they were both under the top-ranked banner, that fight gets made instantly because it's an easy fight for Bob Arum to make. That's something Teo Lopez and Teo Lopez fans forget. He and Terrence Crawford were both on the top-ranked banner, and that fight could have been made in less than 5 minutes. But Teo didn't want the smoke at the time because Crawford was just wiping the competition out at 135 and 140, and eventually 147, we talk about Jeff Horn, Mean Machine, and Earl Spence Jr. And then Teo Lopez just backed away from it. And of course, Crawford, 2 years after Earl Spence Jr., back in September, you know what he did to Canelo Alvarez. And if you're Teo Lopez, you're calling for fights like that, you better deliver the 2 weeks against Shakur Stevenson, because all that mouth is going to be egg on your face and eggs down your throat if you don't do anything of significance against Shakur Stevenson. You can talk about wanting Terrence Crawford all you want, but you forget you had your chance to fight Terrence Crawford when you and Crawford were both under the top-ranked banner, and you ducked it, and you didn't want to call him out on it. There's the problem. And when the opportunity is there and you don't seek it, it says a lot about you at the end of the day. And an opportunity for Teo Lopez to pursue a Terrence Crawford fight when they were under the top-ranked banner simultaneously, and Teo Lopez didn't want it, that tells you who really didn't want that fight at the end of the day. And of course, he waits till after Terrence Crawford has a tough fight with Israel Madrimov to finally call him out, which tells you how disinterested he was in a fight with Terrence Crawford for the longest time, because they were in the top-ranked banner, and that fight could have been made in a snap. That's one thing everybody misses. So let's just get that out of the way. But all of that won't matter if Teo no-shows against Shakur Stevenson. And he hasn't been relevant since losing to George Kambosos. He has a chance to stay relevant of some sorts if he does something of significance in 2 weeks. Because if he doesn't, he's officially irrelevant. And all that Crawford talk could go out the window. I swear, people don't know how to seek opportunities in the fight game the way fighters once did. And Teo Lopez is a perfect example of it. Crazy. Now to the historical aspect, and we're going to talk about one of the real toughest SOBs to ever lace up the gloves in boxing history. That is, of course, the Raging Bull, the Bronx Bull, or the Raging Bull, whatever you want to call him, Jake LaMotta. And it was 82 years ago at the Olympia Stadium in Detroit, Michigan, where he concluded a 4-fight series with none other than a fighter named Fritzie Zivic. This 4-fight series, actually the previous 3 fights, it was basically 2-1 when you talk about LaMotta, but Zivic in the 3 fights prior gave LaMotta everything he could handle, because he won the first fight, and the other 2 fights LaMotta won, but not convincingly. And going into this fight, we talk about this 4-fight series. Question is going to be, can LaMotta finally get one over Zivic in a convincing manner? And a little history on we talk about a fighter named Fritzie Zivic. You're talking about a fighter known as the American Croatian fighter. He was the youngest son of immigrant parents. His dad was Croatian. His mom was Slovenian. Came to the States with his brothers Pete and Jack. Went to the 1920 Antwerp Olympics and quickly became a professional. And we talk about the run that he had prior to this fight with LaMotta. He beat Henry Armstrong to win the welterweight championship and beat him in a second fight to retain it. Then, of course, lost a title to Freddie Cochran. Of course, the fights with Sugar Ray Robinson. and eventually lost to guys like Bo Jack, and of course, found a way to lose a decision to Henry Armstrong in 1942. So we fast forward to the fourth fight of the series. The first three fights, so the first one was a win for Zivic. The other two were for Lamotta. One was a split decision. One was a split decision in a fight that some thought maybe could have gone either way. But you're going to this fourth fight from the angle of Jake Lamotta. He was closing in on a golden opportunity himself. We talk about this particular fight. I'll pull this up as I'm talking about this, because he amassed himself a pretty thick record. And we talk about going into this fourth fight before he got to the big time. The story of this, he finally got the fight he wanted, where he could just handle Zivic. And you talk about Zivic. Fritzie Zivic was one of the odd cases where he was a slick boxer with skills, but also like to toe the line a little bit. He was known for a zillion tricks to overcome punchers, and we know how much of a puncher Jake Lamotta was at that time. And he tried everything he can to keep Lamotta off of him. He held his own for the most part going into this four fight series. But in the fourth fight, anything he did, Jake Lamotta said, "The heck with it. I'm Jake Lamotta. I'm taking over." And that's what he did. And he had Zivic hurt in the 7th and 8th rounds. Looked like he was going to get a knockout, but went on to win a unanimous decision in the former rounds in the range of 6-4 to 8-2. The only 2 rounds he lost was because he was delivering low blows to Zivic, where at times the fourth fight was a bit of a foul fest, because that's what Fritzie Zivic had to do to survive a fighter the caliber of Jake Lamotta. And though he held his own for the first 3 fights, he had no answers for Lamotta in the fourth fight. And Jake Lamotta just went on to a unanimous decision win. Fritzie Zivic turned out to be have a solid career himself. Did win the welterweight title from Henry Armstrong, make a successful title defense before losing it to Freddie Cochran. But that's basically where it ends for him. Fought them all himself. I mean, the multiple fights with Sugar Ray Robinson, multiple fights with Jake Lamotta, Charlie Burley a couple times in there, just to name several of them. And Kid Azteca. And the end came toward the end. Still managed a crazy record of 158 wins and 65 losses, and just kept fighting. And those are the kind of fights where he didn't care who you were; he just wanted to fight. Actually, one of his famous quotes was always, "You either fight or you stay in the house." We went out, and that's what Fritzie Zivic did. Went outside, fought all comers, gave him the best he possibly could. Managed to win a welterweight championship. Solid fighter, and he did have he didn't manage to get the one win over Jake Lamotta. We could trace back to the split decision win over Jake Lamotta in 1952. It was a fight where he out-hustled Lamotta, even though Lamotta landed the harder punches. But the story here was he managed to outwork Lamotta to a 15-round split decision win that still has questions about it today. But that was Fritzie Zivic. Very smart, but also knew the lines and toed those lines, and still managed to hold his own to the massive 150 wins, and he managed to win a world welterweight championship when he managed to beat the great Henry Armstrong. And that should tell you how good of a fighter Fritzie Zivic was, giving Jake Lamotta all he can handle in the prior 3 fights before this fourth fight, until Lamotta said, "The heck with it, I'm taking over," and that's what he did. Fritzie Zivic was a very, very sound fighter for that era. Jake Lamotta is a premier all-time great, especially in that weight class. We talk about the fighting Zivic in that fourth fight. He basically won every round. The only 2 rounds he lost was because of low blows. Remember, it was a point deduction. It was round deduction back then. And those are the only 2 rounds in that rematch Jake LaMotta lost, controlling most of the fight. As I said, Zivic had his moments, stunned Lamotta early in the fourth fight, but that was pretty much it. Lamotta took over, had him hurt the rest of the way, especially in the seventh and eighth rounds, where it looked like he was going to knock out Zivic, but managed to win the unanimous decision to end that four-fight series 3-1 and put his place among the all-time greats in middleweight boxing history. And Zivic is as good as anyone, fought them all. But on this night, Jake LaMotta showed the world why he was the Bronx Bull, because he just did anything and everything he wanted to the tough, gritty Fritzie Zivic, as Jake LaMotta won the unanimous decision 82 years ago in Chicago. Fritzie Zivic is one of those real intriguing stories I recommend you guys to read about. A good fighter, just the guy he fought, Mr. Jake LaMotta. Fight fans can tell you all about him, and they don't have to say much. Just mention Jake LaMotta. His place in history is secure. That is all. And I conclude with a moment. This one, a bit odd in circumstance, but turned out to be one that everybody talks about more than they should. This was Wilfred Benitez against Carlos Palomino in San Juan for the welterweight title. And this was Benitez going for a second world title against the standout Carlos Palomino, a very solid fighter who did a lot of things very well for the longest time and managed to be great. We talk about the great Carlos Palomino. You talk about the guy who won the welterweight championship, traveled to London, and beat John Stacey to win the welterweight title at Wembley. Going to this fight, he managed to defend the title successfully 7 times, which included guys like Davey Boy Green, Armando Muniz, Alvarado Casa Azevedo, and Jose Palacios going into this fight. And we talk about Wilfred Benitez, instinctive with his reflexes, very defensive-minded. And we talk about how he got to this point. Remember, he won the junior welterweight title by edging out Antonio Cervantes in his home country, managed to defend the title twice before he moved up, and then managed to get 2 tough wins over Bruce Curry under odd circumstances in Madison Square Garden, and then beat Randy Shields to catapult himself to this particular fight. We talk about Wilfred Benitez challenging Carlos Palomino for the welterweight championship. This was a chess match. We talk about the slickness of Benitez, his ability to slip a counter, because he was a mastermind in that ring. We talk about defense. Going against a boxer puncher the caliber of Carlos Palomino, who did a lot of things well in that ring. He had a sharp jab, great technique, the ability to go to the body, very intelligent like Wilfred Benitez was. And that's what we had 47 years ago tonight in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The story of this one was basically, if you want to put it in this way, it was a chess match for the most part. And you thought it would be more to the liking of Palomino, but Benitez beat him at it. And there was a case where he pulled away from the fight late because of his brilliant boxing. And after the opening, after a good sizzling start for both fighters, the ring generalship of Wilfred Benitez took over and gradually pulled away to a really closer than expected split decision win over Carlos Palomino in a fight that's still hotly debated, but maybe it shouldn't be, because there were moments Carlos Palomino could have gone after Wilfred Benitez, but couldn't. And that's why Benitez won the welterweight championship that night. One judge had it for Palomino, the other 2 for Benitez. Of course, there's controversy over the judge, Zach Clayton, who scored the fight for Palomino. People crying robbery, which it wasn't, because it could have gone either way. But for this fight, for Wilfred Benitez, he needed to catapult himself to the next level, and he did it against a talented durable, strong, and intelligent fighter like Carlos Palomino to win the welterweight title, because it was 2 fights after that. It was the super fight of November 30, 1979, when he fought the great Sugar Ray Leonard. And we know the story of that one. And this fight put him among some of the upper echelon at that time when he managed to face some of those big named fighters, because this is what he needed. I mean, he beat Antonio Cervantes, albeit with weird circumstances, but won a couple world titles. But nobody knew how great he could be until he fought Carlos Palomino, and he outslicked Palomino to win the decision. Granted, it should have been more a unanimous than split, because I thought Benitez did enough to win the fight. But that catapulted him to the bigger names. As I mentioned, the loss to Ray Leonard. But 3 fights after that, moves up to junior middleweight to beat Maurice Hope to win the super welterweight title. Managed to make a couple title defenses, which included a wipeout of Roberto Duran, and that led to the his super fight of December 3rd, 1982, against Thomas Hearns, where he was just outslicked, but carried on after that, probably say longer than he should, which everybody does. But we talk about Wilfred Benitez, his stature and history. We mentioned the 4 kings. We know that. They like to call this guy the 5th king. I understand it, and it's probably well deserved. Among the Latino greats and Puerto Rican greats, he's up there. And some people don't put this guy among the Latino greats because he was as great as anyone. I mean, 3 world titles, big wins over guys like Palomino and Duran and Maurice Hope, just to name a few of them. And of course, gave Ray Leonard all he can handle till Leonard stopped him late in that fight. As a Latino fighter, definitely a top 10. And he could have a case for a fighter who's probably number 1 all time from the country of Puerto Rico. And we know how deep in talent Puerto Rican fighters are. Of course, some of the more common ones are, of course, Carlos Ortiz and Wilfredo Gomez. But some more modern ones like a Felix Trinidad in there. But maybe Wilfred Benitez has the distinction of the greatest Puerto Rican fighter of all time. And definitely a top 10 Latino great when we talk about his upper echelon and what he did in his career. When we talk about the Latino greats, he's not even talked about enough. And it's almost like a crime, because he was as great as anyone when he got to that pedestal 47 years ago tonight in Puerto Rico when he beat the great Carlos Palomino. Just a standout great Puerto Rican fighter. Now for Palomino, never got to this level. Actually, in his next fight, he fought Roberto Duran in Duran's welterweight debut after Duran wiped out the lightweight division and lost a unanimous decision, retired at that point, but managed to come back in 1997 and managed to go 4-1, knocking out a respectable Rene Arredondo in 1 round in 1997, and gave Wilfredo Rivera all he can handle in 1998 before losing a unanimous decision. The same Wilfredo Rivera who a year before lost to Oscar De La Hoya for a welterweight championship and gave Pernell Whitaker all he could handle in 2 fights. So in the 90s, Carlos Palomino was still doing good things. It spent a lot of time in the fight game. Manager, trainer, and of course, interpreter and commentator, because that's what Carlos Palomino was. A very intelligent human being out of the ring. That intelligence had him brought into the ring and garnered the success he had. We're talking about winning the welterweight title from John Stracey and defending it 7 times. He did something right. We talk about Latino greats. He's certainly up there in that conversation because he was as good as anyone. A smart boxer who was sharp, sort of like a poor man's Alexis Arguello. Just like Arguello, when he threw, he landed. And when he landed, he did damage and did a lot of that in this time. And that's what made Carlos Palomino a standout himself. It was just on this night, he met an all-time great in Wilfred Benitez, who outslicked him, and made Palomino miss and made him pay in the route to a split decision win. Probably should have been unanimous, because even though the fight was about a chess match, Benitez did the more significant stuff. And no shame to Carlos Palomino, who's a terrific, terrific fighter. Benitez was just an all-time great. I mean, fought everyone himself. Benitez didn't duck anyone. I mentioned the loss of Leonard, beat Duran, and fought Tommy Hearns. Had a couple of losses down the line after that. And I hear he's not doing all that great. And I saw the photos. It's rather disturbing. I encourage everyone not to look at it. But that's not the image I remember Wilfred Benitez. I just remember this brash young kid out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, who was driven to be great and did that to the tune of 3 world titles in 3 weight classes and has that distinction of being the 5th king next to Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, and Duran, the uncrowned 5th king, if you want to call it that, in the fight community. Terrific, terrific fighter. Another fighter who could beat anyone in any era because he had this. And if you have this, you can go a long way in the sport. And Wilfred Benitez had it. Same with Carlos Palomino. But Wilfred Benitez was definitely in that ring. There's a reason why they called him El Radar, because he knew his way around. And we talk about ring generalship in the ring for that time. Few, if any, knew ring generalship and did it better than El Radar, Wilfred Benitez. A sound fighter who's probably up at the top of the Puerto Rican boxing history and definitely a top 10 Latino great given his accomplishments. A sound, great fighter. Sometimes we have these rankings and we don't have a set criteria, which I don't even know what the heck it is. And you throw something at me to tell me how I would rank someone, I would give you a barometer. And that something like this is probably one of the easier ones. Maybe instead of just ranking them, just look at the totality and the body of the work of the individual and not compare it, but more or less look at the totality of what the athlete does, especially in boxing where there's a lot of era comparisons for whatever reason. Just look at the totality of what a guy does and just cherish it and just acknowledge that he did something successful. And that's what we did more in the fight game. Because when you talk about these two guys, Wilfred Benitez and Carlos Palomino, they're the perfect examples of it. Instead of putting them in some of these mythical categories and some of these, mythical matchups or whatever, just appreciate the totality of what they did in their careers, because what they do in that ring, I mean, they'll worry about how they would do in any eras. All they worry about is how they do live in that ring. And that's the only thing everybody should be focused on, is what they do in that ring. And this whole rating shebang and this whole era shebang, fantasy matchups from 70s to 2000s, it's just one of the most idiotic and cowardly things you could do when you disrespect fighters like Wilfred Benitez and Carlos Palomino, who were only there to be great, to satisfy their goals and their achievements, and that was it. Anything else after that was second fiddle to them. Terrific, terrific fighters. Actually, a pretty darn good fight. Palomino wanted a rematch but never got it. Whatever reason is, I don't know. But then again, Palomino lost to Roberto Duran shortly after Leonard beat Wilfred Benitez, but that went down the tubes. Just a terrific all-around fight. And on that note, that'll wrap up this edition of All Era Sports with Sirhan. No show tomorrow night or through the weekend. I will be back Monday night. Early start for the big college playoff game. I will make my official pick on that night. If you missed this show or any of the other shows of the past, you listen to them on the Apple Podcast and the iHeartRadio apps. And if you're in the video and you'd like to see this thing burning as I talk, you can catch the video replay on the Spotify app, and those watching on the X and Facebook platforms. You can always watch the replays just to watch this thing burn. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in every walk of life. Always take care of yourself first. Always respect other people's boundaries. Don't let anyone step on your boundaries and all the good things that come your way. Never let anyone step on your boundaries, because once that happens, nothing else matters. Always protect your boundaries and don't let anyone step on you. That's the importance of self-care. And on that note, that'll conclude the show for tonight and the week. I will be back Monday night with an earlier start. Until then, have a good rest of the night. Take care. God bless. Good luck to everyone playing on divisional weekend that's coming up in the NFL. And I'll see you guys Monday night.